Here is something nobody talks about when they talk about wealth. It is not about money first. It was never about money first.
The people who have built wealth that outlasts them, wealth that transfers to their children and their children's children, they did not start with more money than you. A lot of them started with less.
What they started with was a completely different relationship with how they thought, how they saw time, how they saw themselves. And that difference, that psychological gap, is wider than any financial gap and far harder to close.
So today we are not talking about investment strategies or stock portfolios. We are talking about what actually sits underneath all of that. The mindset, the psychology, the way the brain of someone building generational wealth operates differently from someone who is not. Because until you close that gap, the financial advice means almost nothing. The first and most fundamental difference is how wealthy families relate to time.
Research in behavioral psychology consistently shows that one of the strongest predictors of financial outcomes is something called delayed gratification, the ability to resist an immediate reward in favor of a larger future reward.
You have probably heard this before, but what you may not have heard is how deep this goes psychologically.
Poor and middle-class thinking, and I am not using these as insults, I am using them as psychological frameworks, tends to operate on a short time horizon. The focus is on this month, this year, immediate needs, and immediate relief.
And this is not a moral failure. It is largely a stress response. Neuroscience shows that chronic financial stress literally narrows cognitive focus.
When the brain is in survival mode, it becomes almost neurologically incapable of long-term thinking because the prefrontal cortex, responsible for future planning, gets overridden by the stress response system.
The brain is too busy managing today to think about 20 years from now. Wealthy families think in generations, not years, generations. They make decisions today based on how those decisions will affect people who are not even born yet.
That psychological time horizon is not just a strategy, it is a completely different operating system. And building it requires deliberately, consciously training your brain to zoom out.
To ask not just what does this cost me now, but what does this build over time?
The second difference is how they think about money itself. Poor psychology treats money as something you earn and spend. Wealthy psychology treats money as something you put to work. This sounds simple. It is psychologically enormous.
When your relationship with money is purely transactional, you work, you get paid, you cover your needs. The cycle repeats. Money never accumulates enough to generate anything beyond what your labor directly produces.
But when your psychological relationship with money shifts to seeing it as a tool, as something that can work independently of your time and effort, the entire game changes. The philosophers who wrote about wealth and virtue made a distinction that is deeply relevant here. They separated people who were slaves to money, always chasing it, always anxious about it, always defined by its presence or absence, from people who commanded money, who understood it clearly enough to direct it rather than be directed by it. That psychological relationship, that sense of agency over money, rather than anxiety about it, is one of the most consistent psychological traits of people who build lasting wealth. The third difference is arguably the most important, and the most uncomfortable to hear. Wealthy families invest relentlessly in knowledge, skills, and the development of the people in their family, not just financially, psychologically.
They talk about money openly. They teach their children how it works, how to think about it, how to respect it without fearing it. They build what researchers call financial self-efficacy, the deep belief that you are capable of understanding and directing your own financial life.
Poor and middle-class families, often out of genuine discomfort, often because they were never taught themselves, treat money as a taboo subject, something stressful, something private, something you don't discuss. And so the children grow up financially illiterate, not because they are incapable, but because the psychological environment never gave them the tools or the belief that this was something they could understand and control. Generational wealth is not just assets transferred, it is psychology transferred. It is beliefs, frameworks, relationships with risk and patience and long-term thinking, passed down deliberately from one generation to the next. The asset without the psychology gets spent. The psychology without the asset builds the asset again. So here is the honest truth. You can start wherever you are, but you have to start by changing what happens inside before you change what happens outside. Extend your time horizon. Change your relationship with money from anxious to strategic. And if you have people coming after you, teach them. Talk openly. Transfer the psychology first. That is how generational wealth is actually built, not in one dramatic moment,
in the daily, quiet, unglamorous decisions of people who decided to think differently and refuse to stop. Until we meet again, think longer, build deliberately, and remember that what you build in your mind first is what lasts the longest.
If this video gave you value, please like it, share it, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.